the little girl's scream tore through the quiet California street. Like something fragile being ripped apart. Raw and desperate and far too small to carry that much fear. And yet it did, because in that moment as the black van door slammed shut and her tiny white puppy vanished behind tinted glass, 7-year-old Lily stood frozen at the edge of a world that suddenly felt cruel, unpredictable, and far too big for her to fight. "Please. That's my dog. Please stop." Her voice chased after them, but it wasn't fast enough. It was never going to be fast enough. Across the street, inside a high-end restaurant where soft jazz floated between polished marble and dim golden lighting, a man who had spent his life mastering control suddenly felt something inside him snap. Not violently, not recklessly, but with the quiet, terrifying certainty of someone who had just decided that whatever came next would not end the way it was supposed to. Logan Harris didn't rush at first. He stood. And when he stood, conversations paused without anyone quite realizing why. Because there was something about him, something heavy. Something commanding, that bent the atmosphere around him without effort. As though the room itself understood that stillness was about to turn into something else entirely. He had heard the scream, everyone had. But he was the only one already moving. And what he did next would drag him straight into a past he thought he had buried. Before we go any further, I need to know, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. But enough about that. Because we have a much bigger problem to deal with. Starting with Lily standing in the middle of the street. Her small hands trembling, her chest rising too fast as panic clawed its way into her throat. And the van, already disappearing, taking with it the only thing in her life that made her feel safe. Logan didn't ask questions, he didn't hesitate. By the time the maitre d' even realized what was happening, Logan was already outside, the cool air hitting his face as his eyes locked onto the shrinking outline of the van. His mind calculating distance, speed, direction, not as guesses, but as instinct sharpened over years of discipline. "Stay here," he said to no one in particular, though a waiter instinctively nodded as if the command had been meant for him. Then Logan moved. His car, a low, black machine that hummed with restrained power, unlocked with a sharp click as he approached, and within seconds, the engine roared to life, slicing through the quiet street as he pulled out with controlled aggression. Not reckless, not wild, but precise in a way that made it far more dangerous. Ahead, the van took a sharp turn. Logan followed, the city blurred. Traffic lights became suggestions. Every movement was deliberate, calculated. As though the chase wasn't something he had fallen into, but something he had been waiting for. And yet, beneath that focus, something else stirred. Something older, something personal. Because as the image of the little girl replayed in his mind, the way her voice cracked, the way she reached out toward something already gone, it didn't feel like a stranger's problem anymore. It felt familiar, too familiar. Back on the street, Lily stood alone. People had gathered now, drawn by the noise, by the chaos, by the lingering echo of her cry, but none of it mattered. Because the world had already narrowed into a single, unbearable absence. Her dog was gone. And with it, something inside her had gone quiet. A woman knelt beside her, speaking softly, asking questions. But Lily barely heard her. Her eyes fixed on the empty road as if staring hard enough might bring the van back. "They took him," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of it. "They just took him." The van didn't slow down, if anything, it sped up. Inside, laughter, low, careless. The kind that came from people who didn't think they would be caught. But Logan saw everything, the slight drift as they turned too hard. The hesitation at intersections, the way they kept checking their mirrors. They knew, and that was good. Because fear made people predictable. And predictability made them easy to find. Minutes passed, though they felt stretched. Warped by adrenaline and intent, until the van finally veered off the main road. Slipping into an industrial stretch where buildings grew wider, emptier. Shadows stretching longer across cracked asphalt. Fewer people, less noise. Exactly the kind of place you went when you didn't want to be seen. Logan followed, but not too close. He let distance grow, let them believe they were safe. Because the worst thing you could do to someone like that was let them relax. The warehouse sat at the far end of the road. Its metal doors rusted, its windows dark. Forgotten by everything except the kind of activity that thrived in silence. The van disappeared inside, the doors shut. And for a moment everything went still. Logan parked a distance away. Engine cutting off into a silence so complete it felt deliberate. Like the world itself was holding its breath. He stepped out slowly, not rushing, not announcing. Just moving forward with that same quiet certainty that had carried him this far. Inside that warehouse, there were men who thought they had won. Men who thought no one would come. Men who had no idea what was about to walk through that door. Logan flexed his hand once. Feeling the tension settle into something colder. Sharper, more focused than anger. Because this wasn't about rage, this was about correction. And as he approached the entrance, his shadow stretching long across the ground. One thought settled clearly in his mind. This ends here. Inside the warehouse, the puppy whimpered. And one of the men laughed. "Relax," he said, nudging the cage with his foot. "It's just a dog." From the darkness beyond the door, a voice answered, low, calm, certain. "Yeah," Logan said, stepping into the dim light. His presence cutting through the room like something unavoidable. "But you picked the wrong one." For a brief, suspended moment, the warehouse seemed to forget how to breathe. As though the air itself had recoiled at the presence. Now standing just beyond the threshold, where dim light struggled against shadows. And Logan Harris stepped forward not with noise or spectacle, but with the quiet, unmistakable authority of a man who had already decided how this would end long before anyone else realized it had begun. The men turned. Not all at once, no, it was slower than that. More uncertain, as confusion gave way to irritation. And irritation began hardening into something sharper. Something defensive, as they tried to understand what they were looking at and, more importantly, why they felt, without reason, without logic, that they had made a mistake. "What is this?" one of them muttered, stepping forward with a half-smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. As though confidence had been forced into place rather than naturally worn. "You lost or something?" Logan didn't answer immediately. His gaze moved instead, first to the cage, where the small white puppy trembled against the metal bars. Its tiny body pressed into itself as though trying to disappear. And then slowly back to the men, his expression unchanged, unreadable. But carrying a weight that pressed down on the room with quiet force. "Open it," he said. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Because something in the way he said it, flat, certain, final, made the words land heavier than a shout ever could. For a second, no one moved. And then laughter broke the tension, sharp and mocking. The kind that comes when fear tries to disguise itself as arrogance. "Or what?" another man added, stepping closer now. His posture stiffening as if he needed to prove something. Not just to Logan, but to himself. "You think you can just walk in here and—" He didn't finish, because Logan moved. Not fast in the way panic moves, not wild or uncontrolled. But with a precision so clean it almost didn't register as violence at all. Just a shift, a step, and then impact. Sudden and absolute, as the man's words dissolved into a strangled gasp. And his body folded under the force of something he hadn't seen coming. The room snapped into chaos. But Logan didn't. Where the others lunged with noise and anger, he moved with silence and intention. Each motion deliberate, each strike measured, not wasted. Not excessive, but exact in a way that stripped the fight down to something brutally simple. Cause and consequence, action and result, mistake and correction. One came from the side. Logan turned just enough, deflecting, redirecting. The man's momentum working against him as he was sent crashing into a stack of crates that splintered under the impact. the sharp crack echoing through the warehouse like a warning. Another rushed him head-on. That one lasted longer, barely. Because Logan didn't just meet force with force. He absorbed it, shifted it, broke it down piece by piece. Until the man's aggression collapsed under its own weight, leaving him on the ground. Stunned, disoriented, breathing in ragged, uneven bursts as realization began to creep in far too late. This wasn't a fight, this was something else, something controlled, something inevitable. And one by one, that realization spread, panic followed. The laughter was gone now. Replaced by something quieter. Something colder. Fear. Outside, the wind moved faintly through the empty stretch of road, carrying nothing of what was happening inside, where seconds stretched into something heavier. Thicker, until finally, silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. This one had weight, finality. The kind that comes after something has been decided. Logan stood still for a moment. His breathing steady, his posture unchanged, as though the violence had never quite touched him. While around him, the men lay scattered. Groaning, unmoving, or simply too stunned to understand what had just happened to them. He didn't look at them again, they were no longer relevant. Instead, he walked to the cage, slowly, carefully. As if the urgency that had carried him here had shifted into something softer. Something more deliberate, because what mattered now wasn't what he had just done, but what he had come for. The puppy whimpered again, smaller this time, uncertain. Logan crouched slightly, his movements losing none of their control. But gaining something else, something gentler. Almost unrecognizable compared to what had just unfolded. "It's all right," he murmured, his voice lowering in a way that didn't command, but reassured. "You're going home." The cage door clicked open. And in that small, quiet moment, as the puppy hesitated only a second before stepping forward, trembling but trusting, something shifted. Not in the room, not in the situation, but in Logan himself. Because this simple act, felt heavier than the fight. More important, more familiar. He stood, holding the small animal securely, and turned back toward the men who were beginning to stir. Pain replacing confusion, anger flickering weakly beneath it. Logan's gaze settled on them one last time. "You picked the wrong target," he said, his tone unchanged. But carrying something final now. Something that closed the door on whatever they might have thought this was. Then he moved, out of the warehouse, back into the light. The drive back felt different, quieter. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a clarity that brought something else to the surface. Something he hadn't expected, something he hadn't wanted to examine too closely. That girl, the way she had looked at the road. The way her voice had broken, it lingered. And with it, a question he hadn't asked himself in a long time. Why did it matter this much? Back on the street, Lily hadn't moved far. The crowd had thinned, replaced by the slow, uncertain rhythm of normal life trying to resume. But she remained near the curb, her small figure wrapped in a silence that didn't belong to a child. Her eyes still searching, still hoping, even as doubt crept in. Then, a car pulled up, black, familiar. And before the engine even fully stopped, the door opened. Logan stepped out, and in his arms, the puppy. For a second, Lily didn't react. As if her mind needed time to catch up. To process something that felt too impossible to be real. Then it did. And the world rushed back in all at once. "Buddy." Her voice exploded with relief as she ran forward. Her small arms wrapping around the dog the moment Logan lowered him. Her laughter breaking through tears as she held him close. As though letting go even slightly might make him disappear again. Logan stepped back, watching, quiet. And for the first time since this had begun, something close to a smile. Faint, restrained, but real, touched his expression. "You got him back," she said. Looking up at him with wide, shining eyes, still wet, still overwhelmed. "You really got him back?" Logan nodded once. "It's where he belongs." Footsteps approached, faster, heavier. A man's voice, strained with panic. Lily. She turned instantly. Dad. And as she ran into his arms, the man who caught her, John, held her tighter than anything else in that moment. Relief washing over his face in waves that hadn't yet settled. His hands checking, reassuring, grounding himself in the fact that she was safe. Then his eyes lifted and landed on Logan. Recognition didn't come slowly. It hit, sharp, immediate. Logan. Logan stilled, just for a fraction of a second. Because that voice, that face, time didn't erase it. It just buried it. John, Logan replied quietly. And in that moment, something far bigger than a stolen dog. Something older, something unfinished, rose to the surface between them. For a moment that stretched far beyond its seconds. The noise of the street, the distant hum of cars. Even the soft, relieved laughter of a child clutching her rescued dog, all of it seemed to fall away. Leaving only the quiet, undeniable weight of recognition settling between two men. Two men who had once stood side by side in a very different world, long before time, ambition, and circumstance had carved such sharply different paths through their lives. John stepped forward slowly, as though unsure whether the man in front of him was real, or just simply a memory made flesh. His expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something softer. Something deeper that hadn't yet found its way to the surface. I thought I was seeing things, he admitted. His voice roughened by both emotion and the remnants of panic that had not yet fully left his system. Logan Harris, standing in the middle of the street holding my daughter's dog. Logan exhaled quietly, the faintest trace of something reflective passing through his gaze. As he took in the men before him, not the boy he remembered, not the reckless, laughing presence of years past. But someone worn differently now, shaped by responsibility, by effort. By a life that had clearly demanded more than it had given. Didn't expect this either, Logan replied, his tone even, though something beneath it had shifted, softened, just slightly. But your daughter needed help. At the mention of Lily, John glanced down instinctively. His hand resting on her shoulder as she stood beside him. Still holding her puppy close, her small fingers buried in its fur. As if anchoring herself to something that had nearly been taken away forever. She always does, he said quietly, though the words carried no complaint. Only a kind of acceptance that spoke of a father who had learned to carry more than he ever let show. There was a pause then. Not empty, not awkward. But full, dense with everything neither of them had yet said. With the years that had passed without explanation. With the silent understanding that whatever came next would not be simple. And yet, it was John who broke it. You saved him, he said, nodding toward the dog, though his eyes remained on Logan. You didn't have to do that. Logan's gaze drifted briefly to Lily. To the way she crouched now, whispering softly to the animal in her arms. Her voice gentle, steady, as if reassuring him that the world was safe again. I did, Logan said after a moment, his voice quieter now. Less about the act itself and more about something deeper, something unspoken. Some things you don't walk away from. John studied him carefully. And in that look, recognition deepened. Not just of who Logan had become, but of who he had always been, buried beneath everything else. They didn't stay on the street, not for long. Because some conversations required space, not physical distance. But the kind of space where truth could unfold without interruption. Without the eyes of strangers turning something personal into spectacle. So they walked. Just a short distance, to a quieter stretch where the city softened. Where the noise pulled back just enough to let their voices carry without strain. While Lily walked a few steps ahead, her small world already restored. Her laughter returning in cautious bursts as her puppy trotted beside her. And it was there, beneath a fading California sky, that the past began to surface. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in fragments. In careful admissions, in the quiet honesty of two men. Who no longer had the luxury of pretending time hadn't changed them. You disappeared, John said finally, not accusing, not bitter, just stating a fact that had lingered unanswered for far too long. One day you were there, and then you weren't. Logan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched Lily for a moment longer, as if grounding himself in the present before turning back to something far less certain. Had to, he said at last, the simplicity of the words carrying more weight than any explanation could have. Some paths, you don't take them halfway. John nodded slowly. He understood more than Logan expected. Because life had taught him the same lesson, just in a different way. Well, he added, after a brief silence, looks like you took the right one. Logan almost smiled. Almost. But then something shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. Because as the conversation moved forward, it didn't take long for Logan to notice what John didn't say. The pauses that stretched a second too long. The way his gaze drifted when certain subjects came too close. The quiet tension beneath his calm demeanor. And Logan had always been someone who noticed. Things aren't easy right now, he said, not as a question, but as a statement that landed with quiet precision. John let out a breath that carried more than fatigue. It carried reality. They're not terrible, he replied, though the hesitation softened the claim. But they're not where they should be either. Work's been inconsistent. Projects fall through. Payments get delayed. You know how it is. Logan did, more than John realized. And Lily? Logan asked, his gaze flicking briefly toward the child whose laughter now felt like the only unbroken thing in this moment. She's the reason I keep going, John said, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just truth, simple and unwavering. Everything I do, it's for her. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was decision-forming. Logan reached into his pocket, not dramatically. Not with flourish, but with the same calm certainty. Certainty that had defined everything he had done that day. And pulled out a simple card, holding it for a moment before extending it toward John. There's a position opening up, he said, his tone steady, controlled. But carrying something beneath it that was unmistakable, intent. Not charity. Not a favor. Something real. Something that fits what you can do. John didn't take it immediately. Because pride is a complicated thing. Especially when it has been stretched thin but never broken. I don't need handouts, he said. Though the words lacked the sharpness of rejection. They were protective, cautious, shaped by years of holding his ground. Logan nodded once. I know, he replied. That's why I'm not offering one. And that was the difference. Not rescue. Not pity. Opportunity. John looked at the card again. Then at Logan. Then back at Lily. And in that moment, something shifted. Not surrender, not defeat. But acceptance of something that wasn't weakness. But possibility. Slowly, he took it. I'll think about it, he said. Logan inclined his head slightly. That's all I'm asking. The sun dipped lower. The air cooled. And as the moment began to settle into something quieter, something more complete, Lily ran back toward them, her small face glowing with a happiness that had returned stronger than before. Her dog now safe, her world restored in a way that felt almost too good to question. Daddy, can he come visit us again? She asked suddenly, looking between them with that unfiltered honesty only children possess. He's like a hero. Logan stilled slightly at the word. Hero. It didn't sit easily. But it didn't feel wrong either. John smiled faintly, glancing at Logan before answering. We'll see, he said. But Logan spoke instead. Not a hero, he corrected gently. His gaze meeting Lily's with a calm steadiness. Steadiness that carried far more meaning than the words themselves. Just someone who showed up. And as they stood there, the weight of the day settling into something lasting. Something quietly significant. Logan understood something he hadn't expected when he first stood up in that restaurant. Power wasn't in the fight. It wasn't in the control. It wasn't even in the outcome. It was in the decision to act when it mattered. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that sometimes one decision can rewrite someone else's entire day, then make sure you subscribe, because the next story might just hit even harder. And never forget, sometimes the strongest people in the room aren't the ones who speak the loudest. They're the ones who stand up when no one else does.